We bought an abandoned Victorian on the edge of a small town. It had tall windows, narrow stairs, and that faint smell of dust you only get from a place that's been shut for years. The previous owners had just walked out. There was unopened mail on the floor when we first toured it. No note, no forwarding address. We told ourselves they'd just moved fast for work. That was easier to believe. From the first week, the house felt off. Not like a movie, just a little wrong. You'd hear slow footsteps on the stairs when we were both in the living room. You'd smell phantom perfume in the hallway, or phantom cooking smells from the kitchen when nothing was on the stove. Small things would appear or disappear. A screwdriver left on the counter would end up in the pantry. I always had an explanation. Old houses settle. Drafts move smells. We forget where we put things. For a while that worked. My husband leaves for work about an hour before me. That morning was normal. He left. I stayed in bed for a few minutes, then got up and started my routine. Coffee, shower, hair, clothes. Except I remembered my clothes were still in the dryer from the night before. The laundry room is in what used to be the servants' quarters. Off the kitchen, there's a door to a short hallway that leads to it. Inside, there's a door to the backyard and a door to the basement. All three are always kept locked. I'm obsessive about that. I've locked us out before because I do it automatically. Keys live in bowls by every door because of me. I went down in pajamas. The kitchen was quiet and still. I unlocked the door to the servant hallway and stepped through. The laundry room light is bright white. I opened the dryer. The clothes were still damp. Not soaked, but not wearable. Fine. I'd finish my makeup and come back. My cat followed me in. He hopped up on the dryer and settled. I tried to move him, but he wouldn't budge. Whatever. 20 minutes, he'd be fine. I stepped out, shut the door, and turned the lock. Back upstairs, I put on a podcast and sat at my vanity. 10 minutes later, the cat knocked my brush off the table. The sound jolted me. I looked at him and froze. He was supposed to be locked in the laundry room. He was sitting right there staring at me. For a second, my brain tried to explain it away. Maybe I didn't lock the door, but I had. I felt the turn. I said the word. I pulled out my earbuds. The upstairs was quiet. Then I heard it. A weight on the kitchen floor. Not a creak or a pop. A slow step, like someone moving carefully. Another step. My heart went cold. I grabbed the baseball bat we keep in the closet and moved to the stairs. Every creak felt like a shout. I hugged the wall and looked into the kitchen. The lights were off. Gray morning light through the window over the sink. No one at the table, no one by the stove. The air smelled faintly like that perfume again. The door to the servant hallway was standing open, not cracked, open wide. That door is heavy and it fits tight. It doesn't drift. I went straight to the backyard door, locked. I checked the basement door, locked. I checked the kitchen windows, locked. My hands shook so badly, the bat tapped the tile. I kept telling myself it had to be a draft or the frame warped overnight. But the lock has to be fully vertical to catch. I know because I tested every time. It was vertical when I left. I thought someone might be hiding in the house. I stood there and realized I didn't want to find out. The cat flicked his tail like nothing mattered. I left the kitchen, went out the front door and into the car. I locked the car and tried to breathe. My hands were slick when I called my husband. He told me to stay outside and call the police. He said he'd come home. The dispatcher sounded calm until I said an interior door that's always locked was open. We're a quiet town. A patrol car rolled up in minutes. One officer stayed with me while the other did a sweep. Then they did it again together. No marks on the front door. Windows fine. No footprints on the porch or in the backyard. The backyard door locked from the inside. The basement door locked from the kitchen and deadbolted from the basement side. The only thing out of place was that one heavy door standing open. They worked the hinge over and over. They looked at the latch plate. They tried to make it swing open with the furnace running. Nothing. The door shut and latched and stayed shut. Finally, one officer shrugged. "Old doors do weird things," he said. "Call if we saw anyone. Maybe get a security system." My husband got home while they were still there. We called a security company before lunch. By evening, we had sensors on every door and window. The system chimes whenever a door opens and logs the time. It texts us if we miss it. Nothing has ever gone off except when we open something ourselves. We still get the other stuff. Footsteps on the back stairs when I'm in the shower. The smell of perfume or phantom cooking smells at random hours. A cabinet open that I know I shut. We have 3 carbon monoxide detectors and fresh batteries. None have ever gone off. Friends say it's stress. Maybe. I want that to be the answer. That morning still sits in my head. The door open. The sound of someone walking when no one was there. My cat where he couldn't be. I still lock every door I touch and say it out loud. Most nights I sleep fine. But sometimes at dawn, I wake up, smell perfume in the hallway, and hold my breath, waiting for the sound of a step on the kitchen floor. About 4 years ago, my then girlfriend, now fiancée, and I were figuring out how to live in the same city. I already had my own apartment with a lease still running, and when she moved to my town, she found a place of her own because my lease wouldn't be up for a few more months. My town is really just a neighborhood of a large city, the kind of area with row homes, corner stores, and an old cemetery tucked between back alleys. Rent wasn't cheap, but it wasn't Manhattan either. She was starting out in a new career and didn't have a lot of extra cash, so she picked a small 1-bedroom apartment on the first floor of a row home. It had a decent living room, a small but workable kitchen, and a bathroom that was clean enough. Nothing special, but not run down either. For the first 3 months, she lived there alone while I bounced between my place and hers. Once my lease ran out, I moved in full-time. By then, I'd already noticed the apartment had what I can only describe as a personality. Certain corners were always cold, even though there was no draft, no vent, nothing to explain it. Sometimes the temperature would drop in just one spot. Electrical stuff went in cycles too. For weeks, everything would be fine. Then one month, the lights would flicker, or random appliances would turn off for no reason. It was an old row home in a high-turnover neighborhood, so I chalked it up to age and shoddy maintenance. But as the weeks passed, there were other things that didn't feel like wiring or drafts. Little moments that gave you the sense someone else was there. Not malicious, not even scary at first. Just that subtle awareness you get when you know another person is in the room. I would be alone and still feel watched, and sometimes, when I wasn't looking straight at it, I would catch movement in my peripheral vision. Not a full shape or a ghostly figure. More like the suggestion of someone crossing the room while you're focused on something else. One of the clearest times this happened was when I was doing the dishes. The kitchen sink sits just to the right of a doorway that leads into the living room. I was scrubbing plates, thinking about work, when in the far edge of my left eye, I saw what looked like a shadow moving across the living room. It wasn't an object falling or a reflection. It was a motion my brain registered as someone walked past. The presence was so strong that I stopped mid-scrub, set the plate down, and went to check the bedroom to see if my fiancé had come home early. The apartment was silent. Nobody was there. Yet every instinct said there had been someone only seconds earlier. Months later, there was another night that stands out even more. Because our apartment was on the first floor, we had access to the basement. It wasn't finished, but it gave us storage space, and it held the heater and other utilities for the upper units. Since the only way into it was through our apartment, the landlord told us we could treat it as ours. I set up a little workspace down there for tinkering with shelves and tools. One evening after work, I went down to putter around at my bench. Nothing out of the ordinary. When we went to bed later that night, I noticed a thin line of light bleeding up through the floorboards at the heating vent. I'd forgotten to turn off the work light, so I got out of bed and padded downstairs to switch it off. The basement was quiet, just concrete, the smell of dust, and the glow of the bulb over my bench. I clicked it off and started back up the wooden stairs. As soon as I stepped into the dark, halfway up, an intense feeling slammed into me. It wasn't a sound or a thought. It was like a command in my own head. Leave now. The hair on my arms rose. My skin went cold. It felt exactly like walking down a dark alley at night and realizing someone is behind you. I didn't run, but I didn't linger either. I walked up the rest of the steps and shut the door. When I got back into bed, my fiancée rolled over and asked, "What was that yell for?" I blinked at her. "What yell?" She said that as I was coming up the stairs, she heard me scream. Not a mutter or a noise, but a loud scream, like someone had startled me. I hadn't said a word. Hearing her insist she heard it made the goosebumps worse than whatever I felt in the basement. Because if she heard a person's voice, whose voice was it? Things like that kept happening. Seeing a shape pass through the living room out of the corner of your eye. Feeling a body move behind you in the kitchen when you're alone. My fiancé noticed it too. It wasn't just me. After the scream incident, we finally decided to see if there were any stories about haunted houses on our block. It seemed almost logical. Our row home literally backed up to an old cemetery. We joked that maybe the graveyard was haunted. Being curious people, we looked up our address and the surrounding area. That was probably a mistake. We found out the property had once been the site of a church. The cemetery made sense then. The church had burned down years ago, and after that, the row homes were built over the ashes. So we were living in a building standing on top of a burned church, sharing a yard with a graveyard of mostly babies. We laughed, but it stuck in the back of my mind. A few years later, I mentioned haunted places from that area in a Facebook group. A woman responded who had lived across the street a few years before us. She said she and her boyfriend had also experienced strange things. They would hear their names called from outside the bathroom while they were in the shower when no one else was home. Rocking chairs moved on their own. They heard unexplained sounds. She said once she looked out at the cemetery at night and saw what she called the shadow man standing with his hand resting on a grave. Reading that gave me chills. Up to then, I could tell myself I'd just been seeing things. But she described what we felt without me prompting her. There was also an older woman who lived across the street with her adult son, who had developmental challenges. We never spoke, but always saw her outside helping him. Her daughter had a Haitian accent, so I assumed they were from Haiti. One night, my fiancé and I were walking to the ice cream shop, and we passed their building. In an upstairs window, we saw a bunch of dolls lined up. Not cute toys, strange dolls, dozens of them. We joked about it being a hoarding quirk and forgot about it. Now, after hearing how many people on that block had stories, I can't help but think maybe she was practicing something to keep the spirits at bay. We lived there a while longer. Nothing ever escalated. It never felt like we were in danger. But the combination of cold spots, flickering lights, peripheral figures, the scream my fiancé heard, and the history of the land always stayed with me. Even now, years later, when I think about that basement, the memory of that sudden command to leave still makes the back of my neck prickle. We never did see a ghost full on. Only shadows, movement, and that unshakable feeling someone else was there. When I was growing up, we had this long-running joke in my family that the house we lived in was haunted. It wasn't the kind of scary story families tell to freak out the kids. It was more of a shrugging explanation for the weird things we couldn't quite explain. Instead of getting scared, we'd just say, "Oh, that's the ghost again." The more time passed, the more it actually felt like we had adopted that as a household rule. The very first thing that started it all was the hallway light. When we first moved in, there was this light in the narrow hallway that led from the living room to the front door. It was a single bulb overhead, and we got into the habit of turning it on at night while we were watching TV so the living room wasn't surrounded by total darkness. It made the space feel safer and warmer. For about a month, it worked perfectly. Then one night, it just went out. My mom thought the bulb had blown and handed me a new one. I climbed up, swapped it out, flipped the switch. Nothing. Tried again. Nothing. I remember standing there, flicking the switch over and over, thinking maybe the wiring was loose, or the bulb wasn't screwed in tightly enough. Still no light. It was late, so we gave up, figuring we'd deal with it later. The next day, we forgot all about it, but that night, while we were in the living room watching TV, the bulb suddenly flickered, weak and jittery, for a few seconds before it went out again. Everyone froze and looked at each other. The same thing happened the next night. Dead all day, random flickering at night, and then silence. After that, the light just stopped. For 3 full years, the hallway was dark every night. Nobody touched the fixture. Nobody bothered changing the bulb again. We had written it off as bad wiring. Then, completely out of the blue, one night while we were sitting in the living room, the light just turned on. No one was near the switch. No one had tried to fix it. It just glowed brightly, as if it had been working all along. We laughed, but it was the uneasy kind of laughter. From that point on, every few years the same thing would happen. The hallway light would suddenly work for a night and then go dead again for years at a time. That was where the whole "our ghost is back" thing started. It became the shorthand for all the other strange little things that went on in that house. The weirdest thing that ever happened to me personally took place when I was 19. My mom had gone on her first ever vacation, a week-long cruise. She had been a single parent my whole life and never dated after she and my dad split up. Vacations weren't part of our world. She just worked and raised us. So this was the very first time I was in the house alone for more than a night. I was excited, but also nervous. The year before, because a few houses in the neighborhood had been broken into, my mom had installed a new security system. It was one of those systems that announced in a robotic voice if a door or window was opened. It had been in for about 7 or 8 months and had always worked normally. That first night of her trip, I was stretched out in the living room watching a movie. The house was quiet, the dog was asleep, the cat was curled up on the table. Out of nowhere, I heard the voice say, "Sliding door open." My stomach dropped. That sliding door was in the kitchen, just a few feet away, and it opened straight onto the backyard. At that moment, my brain didn't jump to ghost. It jumped to robber. I was 19, home alone, and convinced someone had forced the door open. Before I could even react, the voice repeated, "Sliding door open." I slipped off the couch and moved as quietly as I could into the garage. My thinking was that if someone was coming in through the kitchen, the last thing I wanted to do was walk toward them unarmed. The garage had heavy tools and pipes. I grabbed a metal rod and stood there in the dark, with my ear pressed to the door, heart pounding, waiting for footsteps or drawers opening or voices. I waited like that for a good 10-15 minutes. Nothing, not a single sound. Finally, I eased back into the house, every nerve on edge. To my surprise, everything looked completely normal. The TV was still playing. The dog was still asleep, which made no sense because he would go crazy if a stranger was inside. The cat just stared at me like nothing was happening. I approached the sliding door with the pipe in my hand. Not only was it closed, it was locked. On top of that, we had a metal stopper bar in the track, one of those little rods you insert so the door can't slide at all. That was still firmly in place. There was no way the door could have been opened from outside without smashing the glass. I stood there confused, then went around the house checking every corner. Nothing was disturbed. I tried to calm down and went back to my movie, pipe still on the couch next to me. Maybe 10 minutes later, the voice said, "Master window open." My pulse jumped again. I got up, turned on every light on my way to my mom's room, and found the window shut tight and locked. Before I could even process it, the system announced, "Garage door open." I froze. The garage was shut. Then, Sliding door open, closed. Master window closed, still locked. Kitchen window open. I walked to the kitchen. Nothing. The system went on like that for a full minute or two, announcing doors and windows opening and closing all over the house while nothing was actually moving. I stood there in the middle of the lit-up house with a metal pipe in my hand, completely bewildered. Eventually the voice stopped. Everything was silent again. I sat on the couch with all the lights blazing for a while, waiting. When nothing else happened, I finally turned them off, went to my room, locked the door, and stayed awake with the TV and my laptop until I drifted off. When my mom got back, I told her the whole story. The system never did anything like that again. Not once in the years we lived there. Smaller stuff happened constantly. My mom would set something down, keys, scissors, her phone, and then it would vanish. She would search the entire house, then find it later, right back where she swore she had left it. My brother had similar experiences. It felt like someone was moving things around just to get a reaction. Adding to all of this was the fact that the man who owned the house before us had been, according to the neighbors, extremely paranoid. He had installed his own elaborate security setup before we even got there. Each bedroom and the kitchen had wall-mounted intercom radios, so you could press a button and talk from room to room. Neighbors said he had cameras inside and out. In the master bedroom, he had wired a panic button to a deafening alarm system. One day my brother and I pressed it just to see what it would do and immediately regretted it. The noise was so loud the neighbors heard it. The only way to shut it off was by flipping the breaker in the master closet. He had also remodeled parts of the house in ways that didn't make much sense. For example, in our subdivision, the master bathrooms were all built with the same design: large, functional, with space to move around. In our house, he had gutted it, carved it into 3 small closets, and shoved the toilet and shower into a leftover corner. It didn't look nice or make the house more valuable. It just made the bathroom weird and cramped. 2 of my friends lived in houses built from the exact same floor plan, and their bathrooms looked normal. Ours was the only one that had been redone in such a strange way. At the time, we just thought, wow, the guy was paranoid. But looking back now, I can't help wondering if maybe he was reacting to the same kind of experiences we had. Maybe he had felt the strange presence in the house, the same way we did. Maybe he installed all those cameras and intercoms and alarms because he didn't know how else to deal with it. My mom even mentioned once that she was surprised how cheap the house was when she bought it. At the time, we were just grateful. Now it feels like a detail we ignored. We stayed in that house for 12 years. The ghost never hurt anyone. If anything, it seemed to like messing with us. Lights that worked once every few years, phantom security announcements, objects disappearing and reappearing, the sense that you weren't really alone. It became normal. We'd roll our eyes and say, "That's just the ghost." But writing all this out, I realize how strange it really was. And when I go home for Christmas this year, I think I need to sit down with my mom and finally ask her what she really thinks happened in that house.